Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art. I'm Kristen Becker. I'm the Curator of Education and Programs here at the museum. And we're really pleased to be hosting the Visiting Writer Series tonight and Bojan Louis as our guest writer. If you have a moment after the reading tonight, we do encourage you to take a quick look at our current exhibitions. We have Jeffrey Gibson, They Teach Love, from the collections of the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation. And then we also have a unique exhibition that is a response to our common reading book for the year, which is Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So it's really exciting for us when we have programs such as the one tonight that kind of have overlaps and kind of conversations with the art that's on the walls in the galleries. So if you can't stay tonight, come back another day and visit our exhibitions again. So thank you everyone for being here, and I'd like to welcome Cameron McGill to the mic.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm getting sick, and so I've got a special Cameron-only mic. Good evening. Thanks for being here. It's lovely to see all of you. On behalf of myself and my Visiting Writers Series co-director, Julian Ankney, welcome. Julian is going to be handling the live stream of the event on YouTube and running the chat there, so hello, Julian. Thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks to everyone who's joining online as we welcome poet, essayist, and short story author Bojan Louis to Washington State University. These events this semester and every semester are made possible by many minds and hearts. So a quick special thanks to the English Department, to Landescapes, to the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art for hosting us, and to WC's Common Reading program. Common Reading credit is available for the event. You can speak with Karen Weatherman over there on the right. Afterwards, for those online, there will be a Qualtrics link put in the chat. Never said that sentence before. That's not true. I've said it more times than I ever thought I would. Washington State University Pullman is located on the homelands of the Nimipu and the traditional homelands of the Palouse Band of indigenous peoples. We acknowledge their presence here since time immemorial, recognize their continuing connection to the land, the water, to their ancestors. We view the land acknowledgement as a first but necessary step in our work to serve and honor our communities and our land grant mission. The Visiting Writer Series is committed to honoring this acknowledgement by bringing to campus diverse groups of writers working at the top of their fields, whose work, voices, identities, stories, and perspectives enrich the discussion in our communities, the minds and lives of our students, and our university as a whole. I first met Bojan over email during my graduate study at the University of Idaho when I was working for the Fugue, the journal Fugue. We published several of his poems in an interview, I think in 2018. I had the pleasure of meeting him for the first time in person at AWP in Portland, I think the year after that, at a reading celebrating the publication of Native Voices anthology. for which he contributed 3 poems and an essay. Bojan, in addition to being a writer, musician, and a teacher, is also an electrician. Saw that on not full display, but some display in part of the fiction prompt today in Jamie's class. Quite fascinating. These poems and stories are tough. Sinking Bill, collection of stories, and Currents, collection of poems. They're of work of music, art, prayer, traditions, and place. From the poem Middle of the Desert, from his book Currents, quote, "If left without power or light, trust an electrician who knows luminaries guide only when there are trees or buildings to shine on. Let us also trust the poets and storytellers who illuminate the landscape of our inner lives." I'd now like to welcome the Visiting Writer Series intern, Evelyn Patel, who will introduce Bojan. Evie?
Hello, everybody. My name is Evie Patel, and I am the Visiting Writer Series intern here this fall at WSU Pullman. Thank you very much for joining us today and welcoming short story author, poet, and nonfiction writer Bojan Louis to Washington State University. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our partners in this program, the WSU Pullman and WSU Vancouver English departments, the Jordan Schnitzer Museum of Art, the WSU Common Reading Program, WSU Native Programs, and Land Escapes, WSU's undergraduate literary journal. I'd also like to thank our AOI Tech team, Scott, Brian, and Bill, for helping us out with tonight's live stream, as well as our Visiting Writers Series co-directors, Cameron McGill and Julianne Ankney. We often see encouraging connections between the work of our Visiting Writers Series authors and our Common Reading authors. Our Common Reading book this year is Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, which details the author's experiences growing up in and learning about her native culture and how it has informed her life's work as a botanist. In her book of essays, she guides the reader through her life's work of discovering and appreciating the deep-rooted connections between humans and the earth. She delves into the trials of motherhood, friendship, and her journey to understanding the reciprocal nature between people, the land, and the necessity of foregrounding Indigenous knowledge bases and practices as alternatives to or complementary with Western scientific methodologies in order to address the myriad challenges presented to us by climate change. The work of poet and writer Bojan Louis also asserts the vitality and necessity of Indigenous stories, experiences, languages, and ways of knowing. Bojan Louis is Dene of the Mexican clan, born for the Salt Clan. He is the author of the short story collection Sinking Bell, the poetry collection Currents, and the nonfiction chapbook Troubleshooting Silence in Arizona. His work can also be found in Shapes of Native Nonfiction, collected essays by contemporary writers, When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Songs Came Through, a Norton anthology of Native Nations poetry, Native Voices Anthology, and The Dene Reader, an anthology of Navajo literature. His honors include a McDowell Fellowship, a 2018 American Book Award, and a 2023 National Endowments for the Arts Literature Fellowship. In addition to teaching at the Institute for American Indian Arts, Louis is an associate professor in the Creative Writing MFA and American Indian Studies program at the University of Arizona. Thank you all for being with us tonight to support the programming. Now, please help me give a warm WSU welcome to Bojan Louis.
Thank you. Thank you. There it is. I know you didn't come here to see me drink water, so I'll try to do that quickly. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Evie. Thank you, all of you, for showing up. I'm intimidated all of a sudden. There's a lot of you out there. I've been traveling for the past 7 weeks. And this is not my last reading, but it feels like a nice culmination. I was just telling Cameron that I teach at IAIA as well, and Jeffrey Gibson gave the keynote at the graduation in May. So I was like, I know this fool. Like, this all seems very familiar. And that's why I finally remembered. It took me a minute. But as I was going through the gallery and looking at all the art and taking it in, it's really amazing. It's really it's really well curated. There's something that Jeffrey said that I feel like resonates with the story I'm going to read, and with the epigram that starts that story, which is by Epictetus. So Jeffrey says, "Don't accept the circumstances you are in. Acknowledge that you are in them, and then find a future," right? This really resonates with me and sort of my sense of Diné ideology and ways of being. And also, I really love Stoic philosophy, so like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, of course. If you don't know about Epictetus, many people don't. His life is pretty shrouded in some mystery, but Epictetus means acquired. He was a slave as a child, and then once but he also was, I forget the philosopher he studied with, but he was able to like go to Socratic discussions, and so like while being a slave, he was learning philosophy, and then once he got free, of course, he became a philosopher. I'll get to that later. So a lot of that sort of resonates through the book. A lot of these characters are in shitty situations and don't necessarily get out of them, but they do acknowledge that they are in them, and so then there is a future for them, I don't believe in like Hallmark card endings, so that's not how my life has gone, despite all exterior appearances. There's different levels of hell no matter where you go, and if you accept that, then you can just move on, right? So I'm going to read I'm just going to begin with a poem. Like I said, I've been traveling every week, and I have a child that I miss all the time. And in the new poetry project that I am writing, I'm thinking a lot about them all the time. And myself as a survivor of many things, as a recovering addict. I feel like I am finally able to pull away some of the mask of fiction and poetry and character and performance and actually sort of be my true self in these new poems. There's less farce, I think. And the way that I do that is that I write, I'm a formalist, so I write in forms. And the forms, just to make my life harder, I have been combining puzzles and haikus. And it's also slowed my writing process. Anybody who's a parent can relate. You just don't have enough time ever for anything, and you're always on, no matter what. So my writing process has been slowed down. I feel like I'm more present and I'm more careful. Like sometimes I only write 5 syllables a day, and there's something that happens in that space. I don't quite know what it is, and I don't want to, maybe until I'm done with this book. But I'll share with you one of these poems, and then I'll just get on with it, okay? Traditionally, titles or puzzles don't have titles, so. But I've just been numbering them. This is number 10. I don't know if that means anything. Speaking to cupboards, boiling green lentils alone, last bowl of winter. Sky islands, snow hats. A child hand paints frozen tears, the snap of winter. Running empty streets, exploding beams of streetlights. The bars are all full, with hot mouths steaming up the windows. Bared brown skin warmed against winter. Gray ghost moths, hundreds gathering against screen doors. The hardwood doors left, open to summer temperatures and sunshine deep into winter. Sade in headphones, yellow van to Istanbul, the Bosphorus blue. A false memory of a love former to love, long months to winter. Midnight, a spider's nest inside an ear or lung, are the way fear lurks or uncertainty. Oars stroke a dream's long waters, one day, no winter. Hush now, Shiyaja, there's a witch who knows of you. Weakness is its cape, the broom, a dead heart. This is no learned metaphor, but a cold winter. I find that when I write about tough material or trauma or anything like that, or things really close to me, forms are useful because you're not really thinking about what you need to write about. You're just counting syllables and putting shit into a container. So it's just like, haiku, 575, that's my syllabic meter. Huzzles, autonomous couplets, a sort of standardized meter, refrain, volta, interior rhyme. Trying to follow all those constraints actually gives me freedom to go into deeper things that I'm not normally comfortable with. Because I'm not thinking about that stuff, I'm thinking about the constraints. And then this shit just comes out, right? So, I'm gonna read this story called A New Place to Hide. It is the newest story in the collection. When I gave this manuscript to Grey Wolf, they were like, it's great, we have some edits. Do you have an extra story you could possibly include? And I had two, and I said, no, they're trash. I'll try to write a new one over the course of a year while I complete these edits, right? And I didn't know what I was gonna do, but I had an essay that I just could never write. I could never get to it, maybe because it was too personal, too traumatic, whatever. So that became this, because I could lie, I could assuage the facts as I needed to, and I created a form. So each section is a solid paragraph. There are no dialogue tags. So I created this form for myself then I could just fill the container. And really it just began as I learned how to drive when I was 9 years old on the reservation and drove my cousins around, stuff like that. So A New Place to Hide. The epigram by Epictetus is, there is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. All right. Hopefully I don't have to do this again. When I began driving illegally as a sort of amateur chauffeur, I was 13, and this dangerous time of my life robbed me of my innocence. No, I was gutted, my innocence excised. My viscera were scattered across shimmering black pavement, which was my only reliable guide through life. I was a solitary but not lonely child, a condition I hadn't arrived at on my own. Colonial violence, borderland divide and conquer sentimentalisms, assimilative educational hierarchies of race and class, exile and abandonment, all of it natured in me. Put plainly, I'd spent my infancy and adolescence on Deneta, the homelands of the people, my people, I suppose. Eventually, my idealistic and easily bored parents moved us to Flagstaff, an idyllic mountain town filled with the throat-clenching nostalgia of cowboys and pioneering violence. Most people being cowards, that violence was rarely enacted individually, but in a herd, dull-mouthed bleating can easily turn into a battle chant, the stomping of small hooves, a weapon of mass destruction. The town felt like the edge of the world, and was in fact the western reach of a holy land facing a glacially paced apocalypse. Uprooted midway through the 4th grade, I was thrust into a classroom of mostly white students, we non-whites being a black boy, 2 Mexican girls, a half-Mexican, half-Japanese boy, and me. We were suspicious of one another, ignorant of the factors beyond our control that had brought us to such a setting, and all too willing to accept the tokenships of our respective white schoolmate clique. The black boy, always chosen for any sort of sport, basketball in particular, was called Muggsy Bogues, as if anyone remembered the shortest player in NBA history. The 2 Mexican girls, both first named V, were dubbed disease whores by the cavalier white boys who had cornered them into kissing and exploratory touching. And no one knew what to make of the Mexican-Japanese boy, whom everyone called Taco Sushi, so he was ignored, which turned him into a pariah and bully who focused his attacks on each one of us more than once. I don't imagine he made it very far in life, or has entered law enforcement, maybe taken a menial position in politics. As for me, I was the wild Indian, the red-skinned savage, the other, the enemy, the target for rocks and gang-ups, where I was tied to a tree and burned with imaginary fire amid cupped hand whooping hands shaped into guns, barrel fingers pointed silently at the sky. This was the town, a simulacrum of childish imagination and a lie good enough to be mistaken for destiny. At the helm of this fourth-grade massacre was Miss Reinhold, an older woman with skin like porcelain who I suspected was a runaway nun. Her long, pleated plaid skirts and dark, billowy blouses cinched at her neck reminded me of the teachers back on the res who were all nuns. She stalked across the front of the classroom between our rows of desks, with her chin held high, ours darting from student to student. Her gray hair tied tightly into a bun had the sheen of gunmetal. She maintained a droll tone of authority sharpened with quick sits or quiets, though not one of us was ever punished or made to feel inferior. Instead, we were assigned books to read, along with short written responses for infractions committed against the school policies, as interpreted by Miss Reinhold. Such infractions might include whispering, which burned God's ears, or dawdling, which gave Satan the opportunity for influence, so we must move, sit, or stand with purpose, with intention. For the infraction of melancholy, which amounted to a disregard for imagination, having rebelled against participating in small group activities for a week, I was assigned Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. The book was hardbound in a faded slate cloth cover, the gold lettering pressed into the spine still iridescent. I wrote about the car's large touring engine and horsepower, how its four-seat touring design made it comfortable enough to potentially sleep in, and how its ability to transform into a hovercraft or airplane made it the ideal getaway car, which afforded me the imagination to envision a world beyond the one I lived in, places in the book like England or France, place names without any shape or detail in my young, naive perception. She collected my work and read it standing there next to my desk, ignoring for once the whispering of the white boys at the front of the class whose commentary increased in volume and pace until Miss Reinhold removed a red pen from her skirt pocket and with a couple of flicks of her wrist added 3 check marks and 3 plus signs. Dream as big as you can, she said, far beyond this place, and allow books to guide your imagination. At the end of that miserable year, which was to be followed by many more, the growing urge had been planted in me to get off that mountain and never return, to exile myself further in hope that it might bring about the possibility of happiness or something close to it. Sometime before my 13th birthday, my parents separated without any legal formality, just announced their split in the opaline blue Peugeot coupe that was in constant threat of being repossessed. We were on our way home from a restaurant where we'd eaten quietly, silent islands in a fog-covered archipelago. My mother sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as if a missile or a comet were coming down at us from the endless sky. I'm done with all this, she said, palm pressed against the glass. Young and beautiful, her well-kept perm, a black crown on her head, she was the quintessence of the Nakaidinete clan, hot-tempered, passionate, and whimsical. The glossiness of her chocolate brown eyes inspired trust and a bit of curiosity in any person she met. It was her attention and affection I often sought and was denied, not because she didn't love me, but because she knew our lives together would come to an end. She would move south and eventually disappear altogether. Janelle Minigoat's just another name, I'd say, an innocuous, meaningless name. It's been like that for a while now, replied my father. A long time coming, if you ask me. He gazed at the road ahead, perhaps seeing endless possibilities, being a reluctant and ineffectual parent, a philanderer who would take up with another woman, a singer of country songs in the bars and nightclubs of Albuquerque. He dressed like a clothing catalog cowboy, ready to ride off into the sunset on the back of almost any creature he came across. Clifton Francisco, bastard son of a Spaniard priest, his mother of the Tutnasane clan, which means tangled clan, I'm told, and tangled he was, a spineless tumbleweed adrift in the wind. Once we were home, my mother told me to pack my things, which wasn't much: a mattress, a gym bag for my clothes and shoes, some toys I rarely played with, and my small stack of books from the school library. When we left the reservation, all our belongings had fit into an old GMC pickup we owned then, and packing up on that day had felt similar to how it felt today. We'd always been transient, ready to flee or move at a moment's notice, and I've always kicked myself for not somehow noticing my lack of care and stability. "This isn't happening because we don't love you anymore or anything," Mom said, helping me pack. "We must correct what's not been right." "Okay," I said. I went to live with my cousin, who in her early 20s was pursuing a master's degree in mathematics and teaching as a graduate assistant at the State University in Flagstaff. Her responsible nature was due in part to our strict and thrifty grandmother, who had raised her while her parents vanished into their depression and the poison of its alleviation. I was her, in a sense. Her fondness for me was not at all veiled. She had just purchased a newly built condo in a blighted neighborhood that was within walking distance of my junior high, and her ads for a roommate had come to nothing, so I filled the vacancy. Based on her experience with her own parents, she made an arrangement with my father and mother that entailed a monthly allowance of $150 from each of them, with the stipulation that if they missed or denied me these monthly payments, I would go to the authorities, maybe the school counselor, with a story of neglect and abandonment, which wouldn't be so far-fetched, so beyond the stereotypical situation of young minority parents ill-suited for heavy responsibility. In this way, I was beginning to understand how to pit expectation against potential for profit, and in this way I was truly assimilated. Father puffed out his chest, a bottom-rung rooster. "We will renegotiate these payments," he said, "when you turn 16. See if you're in need of money then, too." Mother, with her impeccable posture, sat in a chair pursing her red-stained lips. "And," she said, "when you're 18, hopefully grown into a man by then, the payments will stop." For a year, the payments arrived on time, then every other month, until they didn't arrive at all, my parents eaten up by their lives and the ravenous world. The stopped payments should have rattled me more or forced me to follow through on the threat of going to the police or Child Protective Services, but I didn't assume my parents had vanished with even a semblance of happiness. I knew they had desiccated in their own despair. With my share of the rent, utilities, and food costs suddenly my own, I was encouraged to find employment. "You're on your own now," said my cousin. "You have me, but you must learn to make the larger decisions about how you want your life to be, and the more options you have, the better. That way, you'll always have a new place to hide." At my age, employment options were limited, so I mowed the lawns of a few of the more affluent houses closer to the base of Mount Eldon using a push mower that required weekly retightening and re-oiling. Raked the leaves and pine needles on those lawns, walked the dogs that shit in the leaves and pine needles, as well as the neighbor dogs of the shitting dogs. It was during this time that Miss Reinhold would once again pass through my life, although briefly. I discovered that she was a widow of a Mr. Brinkerhoff, and after he passed, early in their marriage, she had made the decision to go by her maiden name to hide the small inheritance he left her. A modest house and a savings account with enough for a comfortable retirement, though most of it went to her daily caretakers, as she was in the final throes of dementia. Once a week for 2 hours, I dusted the antique furniture and picture frames filled with the memories of their travels and life together, faded black and whites of them embracing on a beach or standing together atop a mountain. I vacuumed the immaculate jade carpet, kept the house just as it had been on the day Mr. Brinkerhoff died. All of this after-work school managed to keep the trauma of my abandonment at bay, but only for so long. After a month, Miss Reinhold passed in her sleep, alone. Her departure unmoored me, and I became a torrent of crying fits, overcast with insomnia. It occurred to me that Miss Reinhold had lived in a mausoleum made in memory of her husband, and she sat each day prepared to join him in her final absence from this world. My memories didn't fill a shoebox, and the future felt like a bottomless well. I began to skip school, sleeping late into the afternoons, which forced my cousin to drag me from bed and into the shower one evening, and then plop me down in the living room, where a pizza sat steaming on the coffee table. I ate ravenously while she chewed slowly, deep in thought. She told me it was time I snapped out of it. I couldn't go on like this any longer because my clients would lose their patience and school would begin to pry. "It's all right to be out sick a week," she said, "in order to get yourself back together, but any longer than that and what you had before might not be there." She asked me what might make me feel better. I thought quietly, munching a slice, and answered that trips to the library had once been something I had looked forward to but had forgotten about since the departure of my parents. There had been, in those days, a single public library across from town where I lived with my parents and from where I now lived with my cousin. It was too far for me to walk, especially round trip. When Dad still existed, he took me, I explained to my cousin. It was an activity that brought him happiness, at least as far as I could discern. He reveled in being away from Mom, acted childish and giddy, and would tell me off-color jokes. "What do Hopis have that is long and hard?" he would ask. I would shrug, eager for him to reveal their answer. "Their last names," he would say, laughing as we sped towards the library. Once we were there, my father let me out at the front entrance, said he'd be back in 2 hours. Plenty of time for me to wander and wonder at the stacks. He never returned on time, which was always a half hour to an hour late. Dizzy in his boots and flush face, shirt half tucked, hair mussed, smelling like soured perfume and chlorine. My cousin nodded firmly, told me to finish eating and grab my shoes. She had an idea and wanted to know if I still remembered how to drive. On the res, it's understood that once your little legs can reach the clutch, brake, and gas pedals, and you're able to gaze over the hood and dashboard, you learn to drive, though this isn't something specific to reservations, but to most bucolic pastoral communities where the police exist on the fringes of one's imagination, where the police are indeed the numbskulls who never left town and drank themselves into such servitude, their civil service like a lifetime of failed monthly AA chips. It being understood that the youth will fulfill the expectation of being drivers, uncles and aunties, Nali and Che, will ask for livestock and hay to be hauled, for cousins and child neighbors who are left behind to be packed into vehicles and taken far enough away for the adults to kick back a little and reminisce. My driver's education began when I was 8 or 9 on the dirt and rutted roads around Coal Mine Mesa after the funeral of my only living grandparent, paternal or maternal, I don't remember. I learned when to accelerate and decelerate, how to ease the wheel against a fishtail and drive in reverse using the mirrors, the basics, I assumed. So when my cousin and I took to the evening streets in her champagne-colored Honda Civic and continued through more nights to solidify my apprenticeship to the wheel, it was as if the black asphalt had become my veins, every glowing streetlight a synapse burst, and the deeper darkness of the alleyways and trees of the forest my soul. One weekend night, my cousin didn't return home from a night out with friends. I assumed she lost track of time and slept over, which quelled my initial worry, thinking of my cousin curled up on a couch with a blanket and shared bowl of popcorn, the glow of an action comedy flickering across her smiling face. In fact, she had been passenger in a car full of intoxicated friends, the driver included. A cop watched the vehicle drift and swerve and turned on his red and blue lights, pulled the car over. The friend who was driving failed the sobriety test, and because no one else was sober either, they all spent the night in jail. My cousin walked across town the next morning, entered the front door sweating, her eyes sleepless and swollen. The drunk tank isn't a place you want to spend the night, she said. Bunch of Johns and shit kickers getting in each other's faces. She explained the possibility of losing her scholarship if the DUI had fallen on her. "I've worked too damn hard for this shit to get fucked up," she yelled. This was, of course, before the days of smartphone apps and a choice of cab company, the only game in town being Settler Cab, which generally refused to pick up Navajos or any other minority, especially if they were drunk or looking to get home. If they did happen to be allowed into a cab, these unfortunate folks would be dropped off on the outskirts of town, where they either got lost or picked up by the police, and in some instances froze to death. Women were often assaulted or raped, then abandoned to be gathered by the authorities, and their degradation continued further. Small mountain towns have dark underbellies, no matter how quaint, friendly, or liberal they seem. That's an illusion built upon the death and the destruction of an indigenous population, hijacked and rewritten narratives that showcase the leather mask of progress, but from whose skin is the mask cut? The girls who had been in the car with my cousin were 2 sisters, also Navajo, and related to me by clan, which compelled them to refer to me as their daddy Yaja, or their little or small daddy. And the girl who had been driving, a half Hopi, half Navajo girl from my cousin's hometown of Tuba City, who was like a dart or a hummingbird and was affectionately called Birdie. She and my cousin had played on the varsity basketball team together. Birdie, a point guard, my cousin a small forward, because of her solid frame and ability to box out bigger forwards and centers using her strength and elbows. The sisters, a year apart, had dominated their high school's volleyball squad, bringing home 3 back-to-back state championships. This crew of native girls was confident, fist-throwing tough, sharp-witted, with vulgar senses of humor bordering on blasphemy, which made them the ideal role models and customers. There wasn't a narc among them. My first chauffeuring gig went smoothly. My cousin rode shotgun. The sisters bent into the back seat with Birdie sitting bitch. That's what they called it, sitting bitch. For what reason, I never knew. Pre-gamed and ready, with an elated, carefree buzz, they shit-talked rivals whom I had never met and knew nothing about, the details of which engrossed me. That skank snagged out this bull rider with a big-ass cold sore on his lip and then went and passed it on to her man. She didn't even give a fuck. Or, I'll tell you what, if we see those hoe bags, I'm down to scrap. Take off these hoops. I don't care if I fuck up my nails. Let's do this. Rugged and rezzed out, their infectious laughter and swagger, not giving one fuck whom they offended. This was something I wanted, camaraderie and confidence, disregard, happiness. It couldn't be real. I dropped them off a block from the main downtown drag around 10 when all the bars started hopping and everyone felt sexier and tougher, the air thick with big dick energy, as the girls called it, and returned 10 minutes after 2 a.m., parking in the shadows of the parking lot, alleyway, or street. Sometimes one or two of them found other ways of getting home or getting to someone else's home. Other times, one or two people I didn't know piled in, and I hurried across town to be rid of the commotion and wait. A few nights, my cousin appeared alone, her eyes furious, as if she had been crying, her fists clenched and red with fighting. 2 nights, no one showed up at all, though when I got home, my cousin was there, asleep behind her locked door. And one time, a man I'd never met came to meet me. The night was a void when Dee tapped lightly on the window with the bulbous knuckle of his pointer finger. I cracked the window enough to prevent him from inserting it past the joint. "Hey, my man," he said. "The girl said you could give me a ride." He told me they had found some snags, that his friends had ditched him, and shrugged as if I could relate. I was trepidatious, but he named the girls, knew where each had gone to high school and what positions each played, though he looked too old to have been in the same graduating class. "My place is a couple miles south near the interstate," he said. "I'll pay you $20. Dee handed me a crisp note and sat silently in the passenger seat as I drove. At some point, he had me veer right onto a road that went past a new subdivision of prefabricated homes where the city limits met Forest Service land and the streetlights vanished. We turned onto a nondescript dirt road and arrived at a log cabin, the hard bark logs stacked like bones, the trim on the windows and doorway painted sludge green. Dim light emanated from a window onto a white pickup parked askew. Dee grabbed my shoulder, sending shudders down my body. "All right, my man, listen. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, you leave and don't worry about me, okay?" I nodded and he checked his watch against the digital numbers glowing blue on the dashboard and synced it to his timepiece. 20 minutes, he said, pointing to me and then the treed and darkened road we had arrived on and exited the car. An inescapable loneliness overtook me and I began to weep. After 10 minutes, I was able to calm myself and wipe away my boyish tears. The dread tightening my throat loosened and a death bell pinged in my ears. At the 19-minute mark, I was depressing the brake pedal and shifting in the drive when Dee suddenly opened the passenger door and got in, having emerged out of the darkness like a ghost or time traveler. He smelled sour, hot, and chemically musky. "Go," he said. I turned on the headlights and sped through the forest dark. Dee rolled down the window, closed his eyes, and leaned his head back so that the cold night air blew through his thick black hair. I asked him where we were going, and he laughed. "Straight to hell if you're not careful," he said. "I'll tell you, just drive." The wind crested over him, the starlight contoured the shadows of his dark brown face, his slab of a body rested. I dropped him off at a large apartment complex at the edge of town that seemed to have sprung up overnight. Tall buildings like Lego sets were clustered around lit pathways and manicured grassy amoebas. Dee punched my arm when he got out of the car, told me to tell my cousin to get a pager and to give me the number right away. Here's an extra 20, he said, to help you get that pager. When my cousin's friends snagged boyfriends, they went out less and less until they didn't go out at all. The younger sisters dated a white mountain Apache guy who studied the biodiversity of soils and hoped to return to his nation to help develop an irrigation and farming enterprise. The older sister went through a string of bronc and bull riders, none of whom were good beyond a single night, until eventually she moved in with a calf roper who made his living as a boiler maker. She followed his power plant work to Utah and Montana until the two were never seen from or heard from again. Bertie, the boisterous extrovert, got pregnant some months after the crew had dissolved and seemed to be devoting herself to some form of Christianity, not because she believed in a white and all-forgiving Jesus, but for the free and reliable child care the church offered. I'd heard she still went out from time to time, though not at all with the frequency she had prior to motherhood, and loved her child more than anything in this soulless world. My cousin became despondent, spent long hours in her campus office working on teaching materials and equations of improbability. She wore pantsuits when she taught instead of her typical jeans and bolo shirts. She desired something new from life, and I felt, again, our time ticking away together. I began spending more time with Dee. This time I was driving him to a rural residential area with the name of a failed cowboy western, Silver Bolero, Cowpoke, or Park Ranch, in a silver Lexus, its new smell intoxicating. The trunk held packages I wasn't supposed to know about. I was given directions to a barn where I backed the car in, cutting the lights and engine, leaving Dee to wait in the darkness. Don't look back until the barn doors are closed, he told me. A different car would be brought to me, which I was to deliver to Dee's place, where I would await a page from a number to call for directions on where and when to pick him up. At his apartment that night, someone knocked. I didn't answer or move right away, not until the second or third round of knocking became more insistent. I looked through the peephole, saw a head draped with platinum blonde hair obscuring the face beneath it. The pager remained silent, so I released the deadbolt, and before I made the decision to open the door, a woman drifted in, at least it seemed that way to me, and went directly to the refrigerator and examined its contents without taking anything. She opened the refreezer, removed a bottle of clear liquid, took 2 quick sips, and put it back. I bolted the door and sat on the couch. She asked if I was hungry, and I nodded yes. "We got to get a pizza around here," she said. While she rose to look at the to-go menu stuck to the fridge with magnets, the pager buzzed, its little green light blinking alien-like. On the phone, Dee told me the woman needed to stay there for the night. "Lock the doors and don't let anyone in," he said. "I'll be back in the morning." "Are you done with your business, sweetie?" she asked. "I'll order us a pizza and we can watch a movie." She was familiar with all the cable channels Dee had access to and complained that nothing new was ever playing. She'd seen every goddamn movie each channel ran. She reached into her large bag and pulled out a VHS tape with no label on it. I thought of something called snuff films and wondered if it was one of those, or maybe a dirty movie, and my heart raced in terror. When the pizza arrived, the woman inserted the tape into the VHS machine, and to my relief, the title, Sleepless in Seattle, filled the screen. It was a thrilling experience, sitting on the floor beneath a blanket with her, eating pizza, laughing when she laughed. I felt like both the son in the film and the father, because I didn't know what fathers could be like, and the man in the movie seemed perhaps like one I'd like. After the movie was over and we put the pizza box in the trash, the woman said she was tired and should probably get ready for bed. While we brushed our teeth, she peed, and I stared at the ceiling. I didn't have any other clothes with me, so she searched Dee's wardrobe and found a pair of basketball shorts and a t-shirt. My skinny body didn't fill them, though I found comfort in their roominess. In Dee's king-side bed, she asked if I could spoon her, and I said I didn't know what that was, so she showed me, and we fell asleep. And when we fell asleep, it was as if I had wanted nothing more than to be held for a long, long time. The younger of the sisters paged me after she broke up with the soil-studying Apache. She was bloated and unhappy, dating a sloppy older white man, a moneyed alcoholic who dodged alimony payments and got blackout drunk. I didn't understand what she saw in this trucker hat, wearing bristly-chinned douchebag. Beyond the possibility that it was his deep pockets, I assumed it was loneliness or regret that had birthed self-loathing, self-punishment. The two had gotten into an altercation at one of the meat market bars, frequented by college athletes and Greek lifers who believed they were God's gift to the earth, where they'd been drinking beer and eating cheap tacos since the early afternoon when an older, desperate crowd sought an expired sensation of their youths for no cover charge. At one point, well into the evening, the man had thrown a half-eaten taco at the younger sister, poured his beer on her head, and pushed her face with his palm. She, of course, retaliated by throwing insults and slaps until she escaped to a payphone near the bathroom, paged me, and awaited my call. When she returned to the table, the man had been apprehended by the bouncers and forced to wait outside. She was told she needed to leave as well, but pleaded with the bar staff to let her wait inside until her ride arrived. Pulling up outside the bar, I saw the man leaning against a square brick pillar, hardly able to stay on his feet. My younger sister came rushing out of the bar and climbed into the passenger seat. As she did, the man pulled open the rear door and launched himself onto the seat, passing out immediately. One of the bouncers shoved the man's feet and legs into the vehicle with his foot and slammed the door. I drove without direction, concerned the man might wake at any moment. But the younger sister assured me that once the man was passed out, it was always for the night. She told me to head past the shit-kicker communities and go down into the desert lowlands north of the mountain. After an hour, she told me to pull over at a small, ancient-looking convenience store that was the last place you could purchase booze before entering the western end of the reservation. I parked by the near end of the building. She got out and opened the rear door, and using all of her might, which was significant, pulled the man out of the back seat by his feet. His head clipped some part of the car, and I heard him make a grunt yelp noise, which was followed by the dull sound of a body striking the ground and a commotion of dirt. When she got back into the passenger seat, I sped back to town. At some point, she removed the man's wallet from her pocket, took out the cash, and handed it to me. Then she threw the wallet out the window. "Rolled that fucking fucker," she said, tears at the edges of her eyelids. She guided me to her place where she showered while I checked my pager and waited on the couch, flipping mindlessly through TV channels. I thought about calling my cousin or Dee to see if anything was happening that night so as to have an excuse to leave. Dumping a drunk white guy on the reservation border without any money or ID must amount to some type of crime, though I told myself he would be fine. When she emerged from the shower, towels wrapped around her head and torso, the latter hardly covering her upper thighs, she looked calmer but still filled with a sadness beyond my understanding. She took my hand, led me to the bedroom, and embraced me, whispering "thank you" over and over until the towel fell to the floor and she was naked, her skin hot from the shower. She undressed me, removed the towel, absorbing water from her hair, and we lay together on her bed. She taught me the way to kiss her, where to rub and insert my fingers, and how to do it. When we were finished, she fell deeply asleep, and I trembled and wept quietly until dawn, imagining an apparition standing in the doorway, there to punish me for what my body had done. When sunlight overtook the room, I was alone. The sound of the living room and kitchen being destroyed by two screaming banshees paralyzed me with fear. I wanted to call Dee or my cousin, but there was no phone in the bedroom. I heard a gunshot, another three in quick, angry succession. My head rang sharply, and then, like an enormous bell cast into the ocean and sinking, I heard nothing at all. Thanks. Little cheery note to end on, or start. There was a reviewer from some magazine that thought the character died, but he's alive for me in my head. He survives, you know. He's just fucked up for life, you know. But you know, that's what we deal with, and he's moving on because if you think about how the story is framed and some of how he speaks about the past, he's actually always imagining a future at the end of his like sort of reckonings with the present. So there are little clues, you know. And I didn't find that out until much later. Even after I wrote it, like, you know, my intentionality was to do something else, but through the focus of the form, maybe I think that was the gift that the story gave me. As an artist, you're always learning from things you're doing, hopefully. So I guess this is Q&A. I guess I could keep blabbing at you.
Anyone have any questions?
Question?
I'll bring the mic to you.
Up here?
Hold steady, Jamie.
Thanks, Cam. Thank you so much for coming. My question has to do with the notion of containers. You said that you will often write formal poetry and that the container is there to be filled. How do you decide on the shape of the container?
Just the natural sort of, the form. Is this on? Hello? I studied a lot of forms, so there's there's a few books. There's a book by Louis Turco called The Book of Forms. And that one's really cool because it goes into syllabic forms. So there's a lot of Welsh forms that are really complicated because Welsh has these huge words, So there's a lot of sonic qualities that can happen there. There's also a book called The Exaltation of Forms, a Book of Forms. So really it was just how I started this new book, the new book I'm working on is, this is many years ago. I was being very cranky, as is my way. And my wife, I don't think we were married at the time, she was just like, yo, you're being annoying. You need to write. That's what's wrong. You're not I wasn't writing, I wasn't playing music. I was too focused on my job. And she was teaching huzzles at the time, I think. She's just like, go write a fucking huzzle, shut up, get out of my face with your meh. And I was like, I'll take that as a challenge. And then I just dove in. And I've been writing huzzles for the past, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And then I started reading haiku. I really like Japanese haiku. I studied Japanese in in college. And always have had this dream of going to Japan and visiting Tokyo. It has not been realized yet, just because, I don't know, just haven't gotten there. But that's really how it is. It's sort of like opening the book. Oh, I'll write a sestina, see what that does to me. I'll write a pontoon, I'll see what that does to me. I'll write a, Petrarchian sonnet. So it starts from there, and as I sort of start working with the form, I think about what a Shazira can do, how to break things, and then just start taking it apart. Like Lego, kind of like Lego. Music is kind of similar. Music is just counting, a lot of the time. So I'm like, what can I do in 12 syllabic beats in a couplet? What can I put in there? And then what can I keep putting in there, right? So really I follow the form until I want to break it. Yeah. And Cameron mentioned I was an electrician. I was a builder for a long time, electrician for a long time. And all this stuff, building is all just codes and standardization of things that keep you safe so it doesn't fall on you or blow up. And so that's how my mind works because I spent so much of my life following building codes and electrical codes, and that's all just kind of counting, right? So if it looks like I'm just spacing out, I'm probably just counting in my head. Yeah.
Anyone else?
All questions welcome. I don't know, anything. There's one there.
Thank you. Oh, hello. Thank you. Hi. Thank you for this reading. The story is just resonating so much with me as I sit here, and I'm sure there are a number of questions that can be asked and things to unfold, but I just want to ask if your imagination of the age of the young protagonist in the story, is that the same as your imagination of the narrator, the narrational voice? I mean,
yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, no, he's older, so he's looking back. But I made a decision to make some of the way he understands sexuality or violence, or, I mean, he's working for a drug mule pimp. Like, he's a drug mule if you're a pimp. I guess that's what happens when you learn how to drive when you're 13. But so he doesn't see those things, and he even knows in his reflection that he is not cared for, is not safe. So for me, like, by the time I had submitted this book, I was already on to the next book in my head, one that I've been writing for a long time that deals with similar darkness, whatever, Satan and satanic black metal, really. And I needed, I was getting too caught up in, like, the stuff of writing about a band or musicians rather than, like, the lives behind those things. And so this sort of gave me, like, I needed a voice that was a survivor, but I did not want them in the next collection. Like, he's the key to my next thing. So his speech is elevated, he's reading fucking Epictetus, as a youth. And so he's very well read. And that's, like, it's sort of derived from some construction people I used to work with who were very well read, but just, hated academia or hated the affluence they came from or something like that. So it was just like, that was his community, was basically trying to survive in his own interiority while the external world burns, I suppose. Did that answer your question?
Oh yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
More questions?
This microphone can also be yours. Anyone?
You too can have a microphone. Yeah. This is Gatecreeper. They're a local Tucson death metal band. Good stuff. If you're into that, if you need an outlet later. Yes, please. Oh.
How do you feel your work connects to Kimmerer's in this exhibition? Can you find any similarities? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Are there any similarities that you feel exist between your work and this exhibition? If there aren't, I don't know. But do you feel that there are any similarities between what Kimmerer wrote and what you wrote, I guess? Can you find similarities in other pieces?
A little bit. I haven't read, I'm a cranky reader as well. I'm just cranky about everything, I suppose. I'm just born an old man, I think. But I don't know about Kimmerer. It's one of those books that I keep trying to read and I keep putting down. It hasn't really made it into my curriculum quite yet. I teach a variety of things and it always just never fits. But I've been looking, so what resonates with this work is this idea of pastiche and layering and maybe even like a fractalization of things. And so in my poetics, like I think of things as circuits, right? And there's one circuit can have many micro circuits attached to it. And then like I think of it as an electrical panel, there can be many circuits in a control panel. And that sort of is like the ecosystem of my poetry and my fiction. So there are many different things that a story can do. There was a question earlier today in the workshop of how do you like sort of start making your characters not you anymore, because it's kind of where it all begins. And it is like, it's just like every revision is another layer or another element of pastiche. And when I was writing this book, like, I've lived away from my homeland for a long time and have always been trying to get away. I've fortunately been able to live all over the world, but what has never left me, I realized, is my sense of family and community and like the sort of stories and sense of place and land that resonates through me. Like, even if I'm living in Spain or Southeast Asia, I am still Navajo in this place. And what I have to connect me to them are the stories of my family, the acknowledgement of their trials and tribulations, which, you know, are in these books. And they're also my trials and tribulations. And like, while I can't see them, I can exist with the sort of chorus of their voices in my head and my relationality to them and like the earth as I know it from my home. So yeah, I see that a lot in this work. Yeah. I see a lot of pastiche and layering going on, which is... I'm also not an art critic sometimes. Sometimes my response to art is just like, oh shit, that's a lot of acrylic paint. But that's where it starts, and then I add another layer to that, you know, that analysis. But start somewhere, yeah.
We got time for one more before Bojan will be doing a book signing. Both his collection of short stories, Sinking Bell, and his collection of poems, Currents, is available. We'll take one more question if you got it. If otherwise, we can say thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay.
I know, it's all eyes staring at me like, oh, God.
Hi, I'm asking another question.
Please, yeah.
I mean, my knowledge of, you know, Native American fiction is not huge, but I do have my favorite writers, and so part of that your story resonating in my head is me trying to think about maybe your relationship to a previous generation of novelists or fiction writers, Native American novelists or fiction writers. So what are some important writers? Who are some important writers for you in that regard?
It's weird because like I knew there were native writers out there, you know. So like when I went to high school, there was really like no avenue that was shown to me there. Even in college, and it wasn't until like my junior year or sophomore year of college that I even sort of considered like, oh, there's Native American fiction out there, you know, like. And I think it was Sherman Alexie, of course, and I was just like, I don't like this shit. Like, this guy I don't know, I didn't like it right away. It just seemed too, like, clowny. I don't know. He's a clown, anyway. So that, like, I was like, okay, he's writing now. That seems like, what that showed me is, like, this is possible. I could do this, I think. But I didn't know what being a writer meant, you know. I thought it was just, like, sitting in cafes and, like, wearing suits and sitting in big-ass wing-back chairs, you know, and just smoking a pipe. And, like, it's not like that. It's far more miserable. Yeah, this is how I dress, you know. But, like, the ones that really resonated with me were Louise Erdrich, like, reading Tracks and Love Medicine. I was like, holy shit, like, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm experiencing in my life. There's another writer, Anna Lee Walters. She has this really slim book of short stories. It was like Gerald Visner, Joey Harjo, of course, Simon Ortiz. Yeah, all these people who are my mentors now, and most of whom I've had the pleasure to meet and even study with. So like I started reading Native Lit later, maybe in my mid-20s, and sort of understanding what those traditions are, where those nations are located, sort of remapping American literature in my consciousness. But honestly, I read a lot of like the Russians. I have Dostoevsky tattooed on my arm because he was a miserable wretch. And I was like, how am I relating to this person whose literature is 100 years old or something from me, so far removed from me, but yet I see myself in his characters or their circumstances, you know. I just was like, this is weird. What is happening to me, you know? So.
Cool, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Bojan, thank you so much.
Okay, good. No, thank you. Yeah.